Well, it's great to see you all. There's something special, isn't there, about having the children and the young people lead out. I don't quite know why it's so nice, but it seems to bring a smile to all of our faces. And to see them in their early years expressing a growing love for God, I think that's really special. So, how would you like to lose 85 pounds of excess weight? If some of us did that, there wouldn't be much left. And would you like it if you got 85% in an exam? For most of us, if we got 85% in an exam, we'd be doing pretty well. Well, if you had to wait 85 days before your next holiday, would that be too long? Or if you had to work until your 85th birthday, would that fill you with joy? Or if you had 85 friends on Facebook, would you feel popular or lonely? The number 85, well, it isn't particularly significant and it may not mean much to most of us. So why call a sermon 85? Well, the two reasons that I did, and they're both about that number. I heard these facts a while ago and they disturbed me. And the first is that most churches spend 85% of their budget looking after themselves. That means for every £100 a church has, £85 goes on maintaining the building, paying the utility bills, paying insurance, keeping us informed through bulletins and magazines, buying new carpets, chairs and cookers, buying flowers, and on it goes. Now, all of those things are good, but only £15 of that 100 goes into evangelism, seminars for the community, books to give away, campaigns where we open the Bible and share. And that struck me as rather strange and sad that most churches have as their mission statements such things that they are there to share the love of God with the local community. But in reality, the way they use their money shows they have very different priorities. And this church is not doing great in its percentage. We spend about 10% of our budget on evangelism. And some years it's better than that. If the building doesn't cost so much, then we may spend more than that. But once you have a church building, it tends to cost a lot to maintain it. Now, we are beginning to use this building for more than just worship. This year we had the Daniel Prophecy Series, and we are now doing health screenings from this facility. And also twice a week, the building is used for Narcotics Anonymous meetings. Now, that isn't exactly evangelism, but it is a good community use. So our initial percentage that we spend on evangelism is not high. But the more we use these buildings for things other than ourselves, then the higher that percentage is going for evangelistic expenditure. So that's the first figure that really troubles me, this 85. And the second figure is one that I have heard a couple of times recently. And it's this. For a church 10 years and older, it takes 85 people to win someone to Jesus. Andrew, can you just help me with this, please? I need to get it going. But while I'm doing that, can you just press that one, Ricardo? So, for a church 10 years and older, it takes 85 people to win one person to Jesus. That's quite a figure, isn't it? So just let that sink in for a moment. So to win one person, it takes all of these people in a church that is established over 10 years. 85 people in order to get one. Now, that may not sound too bad, as we may think, well, this is a difficult country to try to bring people to Christ in. And that's a reasonable response. But just consider this fact, which will give some counterbalance to that. In a church 1 to 3 years old, it takes 3 people to win 1 person to Jesus. That's interesting, isn't it? 3 people to win 1. And remember the context? That's in a church 1 to 3 years old. So being able to bring someone to faith is not so much about how materialistic and secular they are. It's more about, according to this statistic, it's more about how old and established the church is. Now the truth is, the older the church, the less likely it is to be focused on evangelism. It tends to get sidetracked and inward-looking. Now that may be uncomfortable, but I believe it's the truth for us as much as it is for many other churches. Now, of course, we've been here as a church over 30 years, and there's not a great deal we can do about that. What churches tend to do is plant another church. We're a small group, and we may not be ready for that, but just sort of keep this figure in your minds. And by the way, you may be wondering, well, why am I preaching a sermon like this on a day when we're really focusing on adventurers? Well, it's purely because Lewis, your adventurer leader, asked me to speak about evangelism. And I'm very happy to do so, because adventure is really the heart of it, is how to help other people develop in their faith as well as growing themselves. So for me, I think it's a very appropriate topic. But just answer this question for yourself. Which outreach ministry have you personally been involved in? And I'm just thinking recently, over the last few months and years, perhaps while you've been here in Bury, or maybe if you've come not so long ago, maybe in some other church. And it may be doing something practical and direct, or it may be an intentional befriending of people. I remember Donielle, and some of you will remember her, who was on the base, and she moved, I think it was a little over a year ago. And she always seemed to be networking with other women. I believe she worked in the library there. And she wanted to have meetings in her home, and I think she actually did invite some of them to religious meetings where they were speaking about the Bible. So your outreach ministry, well, it might be something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be knocking on doors with the Bible in your hand. Just be thinking, what have you been doing in terms of trying to share the love of God with people? So it's important that we as Christians engage in some kind of evangelism. Just focus on these verses. And you may not immediately think of evangelism as you read them. So the question was asked of Jesus, which was the most important commandment? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind and strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. And the background to this is the Pharisees had exalted the first 4 commandments which point out the duty of man to his maker. And they said they were of far more significance than the other 6, which defines man's duty to his fellow man. But when it came to practical godliness, they failed. But Jesus redressed the balance by his actions. And he'd been criticized. So this is really a test for him. Which was the greatest commandment? Now, the rabbis said there were 365 prohibitions in the law and 248 positive commands. But Jesus reduced them to 2. Notice from the question from the teacher of the law was, which is the greatest commandment? In other words, he was only looking for 1. Instead, Jesus gave 2. Now, he could have just given 1, and of course that's the most important one, which is really love the Lord your God. Everything stems from that, so that is the greatest. But Jesus felt the need, he didn't just want to leave it there, but he wanted to add the second, which is love your neighbor. I don't know about you, but I like it when things are simplified. Mary has complained in the past that when she explains things to me, sometimes I've said, don't give me all the details, just get to the point. Now, if you're a woman, maybe a man has said that to you and you probably don't like it very much, because you want to explain and you want to enlarge and you really want to share what's on your mind. Maybe it's a man-woman thing. But Jesus got to the point. He boiled down the commandments from God. First 1 and then 2. And you can't get much simpler than that. So love for God, love for man. So Jesus pointed them to the correct interpretation of the law. It was all about love. And one, of course, springs from the other. Now, here's a thought that you may not have considered so much. It was actually Jesus who lifted this love of neighbour from its position in Leviticus, where it may not have been given much prominence, and put it alongside the greatest commandment of all. Don't miss this point. We are so familiar with the pairing of the two commands, love for God, love for people. Nowadays, we tend to pair things a lot. Fish and chips, salt and pepper, right and wrong, strawberries and cream, black and white, left and right, Ant and Dec, Harry and Meghan, night and day. All the time we're pairing things together. Now, in our thinking, as far as the law is concerned, we naturally put love for God and love for people together. As Adventists, we know the first 4 commandments are about our love for God, and the last 6 are about our love for people. So when we read this account where Jesus summarizes these 2, there's no surprises for us. But actually, if you were a listener in Jesus' day, this would have been something new for you. They hadn't heard them connected like this before. And of course, they also gave much more emphasis to that first command. And in theory, they were right. But in practice, it was often done with the wrong motive. They sometimes used commandments about honouring God to get out of their duty to help people. Have you ever done that? I remember once I was driving to church and there was someone who had broken down on the side of the road and they had a puncture. And I think it was an older lady and she seemed to be struggling a bit. And I sort of noticed her in her struggle, but I ignored her and I carried on and I went to my church service because I argued that if I stopped and helped, I was going to be late. Now, I don't know if I was right or I was wrong, but I did think about it afterwards. Which was more important, a person in need or going to a worship service? Well, Jesus addressed something similar. I'm not going to read that, but I think you know the story when Jesus spoke about this korban, when a younger person, they had a duty to take care of their parents because there was no welfare state. But instead of providing for their parents, they said their gift was korban, which means they had devoted it to God. But actually, it was just an excuse because they wanted to get out of their family responsibilities. So Jesus agreed that love for God is absolutely supreme. But he quickly brings in love for people as an outworking of that love. So this summary of the commands is really important for us. Now, there are many ways that we love people. But the one I'm picking up on today is by letting people know that they are children of God, that they have a heavenly Father who loves them, who values them, and that he died for them. And we call this evangelism. None of us would be Christian today if it hadn't been for someone leading us in that direction. Maybe you were brought up as a Christian. Think of all the love and direction and teaching you receive from parents, from church, and from friends. Or you may be like me, you didn't grow up as a Christian, but someone actively shared their love of God with you. In my case, it was my sister. her life was powerfully changed by God. And she shared with me about her loving Father above. I'm so grateful she did, because my life has been transformed beyond recognition from what it was. I wonder if you can say the same thing. Aren't you absolutely delighted that someone or a group invested time and concern in you to help you along your pathway of faith? I'm sure that's true of all of us. And in the same way, we want to share with other people. We don't want to be selfish and hold on to the benefits of our faith. It is there to be generously shared. And we do so primarily by loving people. In John 15, Jesus talks about loving people. He says there that the greatest love a person can have is to give his life for them. And that was obviously a reference to the love that Jesus has for us. And he then says in verse 16 that we have been appointed to go and bear fruit. And the obvious meaning of this is that we tell people about God's love and we seek to get them to respond. And the section closes with the command of Jesus that we love each other. So one aspect of our showing love for people is to minister to their spiritual needs. And I would say that here in the UK, this aspect of showing love for people is probably more important than the practical. Certainly we need to make sure that people are not hungry and that their physical needs are cared for. However, we do have an effective welfare state. It's not perfect, but there really shouldn't be a need for people to go hungry. Sometimes people slip through the net, and yes, we do what we can to help them. But I'm suggesting the greatest need that people have here is the spiritual. People are largely unaware of God and his incredible love. They don't know that he's returning soon. An excellent way for us to show love to people is to communicate with them about our God and to tell them that he can change lives. He can bring hope and healing. And I'd like us to think about what we're doing here as a church in terms of sharing. I've already mentioned some things, but just consider it. But before we think about what we're doing as a church, just think about each of us in our own lives. How are we sharing with people around us? I think that's more important than any program the church may run. Evangelism is about people. The word literally means good news. So you and I come in contact with people every day. And it's up to us to find sensitive, relevant ways to share the good news of the love of God with them. You're close to someone. We're all close to someone or a group of people. It could be your family or friends or work colleagues or neighbours. These are the people God has placed around you. And if all we ever talk to them about is the weather, then we are being very British, but we're missing something. Mary and I have recently moved, just less than 2 months ago, to a village just outside Cambridge. And we know that in the past we haven't done as well as we might in terms of sharing God's love with those people nearest to us. And we would like to be more intentional now about doing that. And it starts by making friends. And we're beginning to do that. When we moved in, we actually didn't make the first move, but our neighbours did. And we got welcome cards from 4 of our neighbours, and another one, as soon as the day we moved in, said we could go and park our car there if we wanted to. So 5 people went out of their way to welcome us. Now that is unusual. I've moved so many times in this country, and I've never known anything like it. So if you think you've moved and you didn't get welcome cards, well, you don't normally get them. So it felt like God was affirming our presence in that place. And after that, after they put a card through the door, we went to them and introduced ourselves. But now it's up to us to build on the opening that I believe God has placed there. How about you? Are you making friends? Are you looking for opportunities to show love and to share God? And then there's the formal things that we do as a church. I already mentioned that we open our doors here twice a week for the NA meetings. We hardly charge enough to cover even our electricity, so we certainly don't do it to make money. And Richard and one or two others come in to open up, and they also at times are able to chat with those that come along. So that's something valuable I think this church is doing. And we had the Daniel series earlier this year. True, we didn't get attenders from the community, but we provided the chance for them to come. And we've had one health screening day last year. I thought it went really well, and a number came from the community. Many good interactions took place. And we intend to build on that. And as Richard said, we're going to have another health screening here on Sunday, the 2nd of June. We've also health seminars and lunches, which are meant not just for us, but also for our friends and people in this community. Now, it's true, very few visitors have actually attended, but we keep the doors open and we keep the opportunity there, as we don't know at some point who may come. We're also seeking to engage with those that wash cars, and we often take them cakes, just as a gesture of kindness. And one or two did actually come to our last health screening. We sometimes put out literature, and we offer people free spiritual books. And some do take up the offer, and a few have recently. So it's up to each of us to keep that outward focus in our own lives and as a church, and to expand upon it. And as Christians, it's important that we're always looking around us at whose God has placed in our circle of influence that we could share him with. So as I say, this church is engaging in these community health screenings. And please don't just ignore this ministry. Your help is really needed. You don't have to be a health professional. We need all kinds of people with different skills and abilities. And first of all, we really do need you today and over the next couple of weeks, as we're going to put out our advertising flyers, whether we go into the town or whether we go round to the doors, or whether we might just go over to the car park in Tesco and hand them out to people so they're prepared to come back. And we may even do some more tomorrow if anyone's got time, the day that people come to do their shopping. Say in a couple of weeks' time, we're actually going to be having a health screening so they can be getting themselves ready. So it's quite a simple thing to do. And all it's really going to take from each of you is just a little bit of time. Please take some time to help sacrifice in this very practical way. And then we need help on the day, on June the 2nd. We're almost punching above our weight. I don't know whether you have that phrase in your language or the country you come from. So we're a small group, but we're intending to do something quite big. Last time it worked well, but we do need pretty much everybody in the church to take part. We really do need you on that day. Put the date in your diary. If you're able to take the day off work, it will be absolutely brilliant. It's a united effort, and if we can do it together, I think we'll be doing something valuable in this community. I'm going to close with a true story of what happened to somebody in our previous church area in Watford. And it happened a few years ago, and I had permission to tell it. Susie, a retired doctor and member of the Stanborough Park Church, was reading her Bible, and she had the impression that she should go down the road and talk to people. Well, she didn't do anything about it. She just ignored that thought. But a while later, a few weeks later, she was reading her Bible, and again she had the impression she should go and talk to people in her street. Well, this time she stopped reading, and she went on knocked on doors for 4 hours. It had just been in the news that a pregnant woman with 3 children had committed suicide. So this was sort of on people's minds. But this woman said that if she'd had good neighbours, it would have made life easier. So Susie went around and she was talking about that. And Susie was a retired doctor. And she was telling people how once she worked in accident and emergency, and on one occasion she had 7 attempted suicides in one evening. So she was kind of using that as a way just to talk to people. And she suggested, well, why don't we try and do something here in this street and actually get together and get to know each other? Well, Mo said it was a good idea, and 3 people came along to her home just for a drink and a chat. Now, she arranged to do it again. 10 people said they would come, but none did. Now, Susie is persistent, so she contacted them and asked them why they didn't come. Well, they made all their different reasons and excuses. But there was one family who actually apologised, and they seemed interested in coming again. Well, Susie said she had some cake left over, and would they like to come and get it? Well, when they came to get it, the son came into the house to get the cake, but the mother was there in the car with a bad leg. And Susie went out and prayed for her. And she and Susie both said later that they felt this was the reason that Susie had felt impressed to go out and meet people. It was really to get in touch and to try to be of some benefit to this lady who said that she was kind of lonely and she felt she needed a mother-type figure to relate to. Susie suggested that she be anointed, which Mary, who was one of the pastors of the church, did. And the result is the mother had studies of the Bible, and soon her 14-year-old son wanted studies as well. I'm not sure eventually what happened to the mother, but a little while later the son got baptized and became an active member and a growing Christian in that community. When you follow the promptings of the Holy Spirit in terms of evangelism, it's best to follow it. You'll probably have high expectations and maybe good prospects. And it may come to nothing. You know, at one of those meetings, nobody came. But with persistence and prayer, who knows what might happen and who God might connect you with. So remember that number 85. In older, established churches, it takes 85 people to win someone to Christ. Now, there may not be an awful lot we can do about that, but what we can do, I suppose, is start to think, can I become more enthusiastic and begin to do things in terms of sharing? And then the second thing about the 85 was 85% of most budgets go on the churches themselves. So just a question or two for you to consider. What would you like to do to be doing something that is different in this community, in this fellowship? And what could you do to live out those 2 greatest commandments of loving God and loving people? Amen.